Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us to Driven 2021. Welcome to today's episode featuring BP3's design team. Before I hand things off to Krista, I want to encourage you to use our chat feature to ask any questions that may arise during our interview with Nick and Melissa. At the end of today's interview, Melissa and Nick will be answering questions from the chat live. Also in the chat, I have placed a link to register for the live chat raffle of Beats AirPods today. It is important that you use your work email when registering for the raffle, as we must comply with corporate and government guidelines. With all of that, I'll go ahead and pass things off to Krista.
Well, thank you, Julia, and thank you all for joining us today. Thank you specifically to Nick and Melissa for coming on and agreeing to do this interview with no pressure whatsoever. So let's get started. There's a lot of industry terms, people throwing around the word design, people throwing around the word design thinking, design sprint, design everything. Let's get some basics out of the way. So Nick, why don't you start us with what is the basics of design and what's the goal of a design engagement?
Yeah, so the basics of design really, it's really about when we talk about design thinking and design sprints and all that, this is all built around just understanding what we're trying to do. So when we go through and want to start, a design engagement, what we're really trying to do is understand what we want to achieve, who we want to achieve it for, and really we build anything or any design that we build out will kind of be set to help achieve those goals. So I think it's really just strategic design rather than just kind of designing for the sake of design.
And so what's kind of the goal, like what would be the end goal of any design engagement, or is there an end goal for every design engagement?
So what we want to do is be able to walk out of the design engagement, understanding what the organizational goals are, understanding what they're trying to accomplish. For starters, because I think that's really the catalyst for everything that follows after, and it really just helps kind of keep everybody who's involved on the same page.
Nice, that's really good. So Melissa, why don't you take a second to just walk us through what design services does BP3 provide?
Yeah, so we have a couple different options because we know that one size fits all doesn't work for everyone. And so our first kind of, the small engagement, if you were ordered like a grande at Starbucks, this is what you would get. That's called an ignition workshop. So this is like a 3-hour workshop. We can split it into 2 different days. And the goal is to just really like quick fire. Let's get everyone who needs to be part of the conversation in a room. Let's narrow down on what we want to focus on. And that's a really great starting point, so that once we get into the design engagement, we can like hit the ground running. We already have that alignment and definition for what the goals are. Our more like medium size offering is our design sprints. So these can be a couple days. They're more in depth. We incorporate more input from your team to be able to be even more informed about our approach. And the output of that can be a like prototype that we can actually like put in front of people who are gonna use the solution. And so it's a really quick way to learn like as fast as you can, as cheaply as you can, and come up with all of these great insights for like what the next step forward is going to be. And the last thing we offer is custom product development. So, obviously, sometimes this takes years. So, we're willing to walk along with our client to really, walk them through like, how can we build this roadmap so that you are like continually getting value and we're continually learning. And the key is to, use the agile process, use the, low fidelity or kind of simpler versions of, what we want to build and to always be learning from that. So 3 things: small, medium, large. ignition workshops, design sprints, those are a couple days, in custom product development, could be years, could be months. We're willing to walk along with you to make sure you're happy with what we come up with.
I like that you put it in Starbucks terms, because that's what I can understand: a grande, a venti, and then of course the Trenta, because that's actually what I consume, as you can see. So in those design sprints, do you kind of get out, empathy is what you're looking for, I guess. But are people often like taken aback by what's happening in their own organization? Like, I guess, are they learning and discovering new things that are happening?
Yes.
Yeah. So
I think, there's an idea of what the problem is from like the 10,000-foot view, but being able to see how that impacts the people who are like in the trenches every day is always like really surprising to see how that kind of translates into their day-to-day. And, a lot of it is just the taped up solutions that people on the ground are doing, because they're like, well, I need to do my job, but the tools I have aren't really cutting it. So I need to kind of work around it to make it work for me. So it's always, surprising and interesting. And that's what I love about research is the fact that you're always surprised and you're always learning. That's what makes it fun for me.
So Melissa, you're the research and discovery expert, right? What does that actually mean? Where do you get started, and what comes out of research most of the time?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about stories, and research is basically like doing whatever you need to do to understand the problem. And it's going broad, and it involves talking to experts or subject matter experts that are closer to the problem, that have an idea of what the domain is. It also can look like just observing people, because we like to have a mix of spoken kind of stories that we incorporate into our process, but also just being able to see it with our own eyes, I think is really eye-opening, because there's a lot of problems that people might not articulate that you as an outside observer might key into when you realize like, oh, you have 10 sticky notes on your monitor that tells you how to remember to do this process. Maybe we can make that a little easier. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's going really broad and using all of these different resources and inputs into your process to understand the problem area in a way that really helps us inform what that day-to-day problem looks like and how it translates to the bigger business goals.
Yeah, so you mentioned observation. People who don't engage with like our design services, or maybe don't have a designer in-house, but they want to be able to do some discovery on their own. Do you have any suggestions for people who can, like, any practices or things that they should be doing to really get to the root of the problem or do their own discovery and research?
Yeah, there's a concept called Guerilla Research, which is a bit more, it's more informal research. And what that entails is kind of when you don't have as structured of like a research process, or your organization is new to it, it's being scrappy, basically, is what that means. And I think it's just being able to identify like, who can I talk to that's closest to the problem, and being able to like hear, their insights for, what things are closer to the ground. And also to taking folks along if you can, I think is key. So the magic of research and collecting these stories is that, you know, we get surprises, we get, you know, crazy things that are happening on the ground or things that really surprise us. I think the beauty of design is being able to like open people's eyes to that, of like, you know, we're not just concerned or looking at the metrics and talking about moving the numbers. You know, we also need to take a look at how that's impacting people, and being able to like remember like, oh, this is the human component of the problem that we're solving. Yeah, so
I think that's great advice for focusing on the human. So once we've done the research, we found the problem. Nick, I know you're kind of the guru on getting like, I guess, enterprise alignment around what's next. What kind of steps do you take? What do you do to gain some of that alignment?
Yeah, to Melissa's point, it really is about empathizing with your users, understanding their needs and their challenges. And then it's also about understanding, you know, the business as well and their challenges and their needs, really getting those goals from both set and from both the user and the business to kind of get those married up. And so, you know, as you start to walk through that process, really it's just about articulating and highlighting to anybody involved what the goals are, who your audience is, and then you can start to work your way down to get those more granular objectives, something that's a little bit more measurable, and that you can focus on, and really using those things as your guiding post as you continue to move forward and work through towards a product or whatever it is that you're putting together. Having that will allow you, no matter who's coming and going, who the stakeholders are, because we know that the ground shifts during any sort of product development, that you'll have those things handy and ready to rock for when people are coming and going, or just to keep everybody aligned as you continue to move forward on the project. And it really helps when it comes to making challenging decisions, or you hit kind of forks in the road. It can help mitigate splitting hairs, or it can help with you know, any sort of a rabbit hole that you fall down. And then also opinions can be expensive. So, you know, when we have some opinions to get around to, you can lean on those goals and those objectives in your audience to really help navigate those items well, just to make sure that you're continuing to, you know, head the direction that you want to head.
Okay, I'm going to put that in neon behind me. Opinions get expensive.
yeah, and to add on to that, I think just seeing firsthand in projects where we were able to, you know, get everyone in the same room versus where that process, you know, didn't happen as like on a unified front. I think the difference was like night and day, because the less kind of understanding or buy-in that you had from the team, the more, you know, hesitant they were to kind of contribute to what we were working on. And like, that's totally understandable. Like, why would they want to, you know, collaborate if they weren't sure like what the purpose of it was? And, you know, on another project, when we kind of started on the right foot with those goals, it was like everyone just kind of like, you know, stepped in line, and, you know, there wasn't a question of like, why are we doing this? Like, we all knew, because they also like participated in like defining why we were doing this. And I think, yeah, when we say like aligning on goals and, you know, defining what success looks like, I think a lot of the times there's a vague idea of what success looks like, or the problem space is very broad. And I think a lot of the disconnect can happen when there is an agreement on what the problem is and how to solve it.
Yeah.
That's what the purpose of these goals workshops are.
So I've been in corporate America for long enough to know that people will get aligned behind a problem, people will get aligned behind a goal, and then we all nod our heads and we leave the meeting and we go back to our desk jobs and we start working again. And I'm going to say we forget what the goal was, or we forget what we were going to do, or we forget the alignment. How do you guys remind people? How do you make sure that people are still staying on track with the goal? I mean, is it down to like writing it down and making everybody use it as their backdrop? Like what's the way to do it?
I mean, honestly, I think it can come in many different forms. It all depends on the situation. But yeah, there's been times where every checkpoint, every meetup, every daily stand-up, I've had it up there for everybody to review just to make sure it's there. And everybody, whether they're coming new on the project, have been on the project, no matter what it is, it's right there in the forefront. And then, in other times it's, if you work with teams who are in alignment and who are, very privy to the goal, and we're moving forward, it's still part of the conversation, right? I think it should just inherently come up in some of the conversations anyway when we're making decisions. And so I think that it's just, no matter which way you can make it be around, make it be around.
So,
Yeah, and I think an important part is, getting people to contribute to the goals, because then they're more invested and they're going to remember more of what the goals were if they were a part of that conversation. Like we never want to kind of dictate like these are the goals. Like we want that to be like as democratic of a process as possible, so that they are the ones who are owning that. And when we do that, I feel like there's a lot less need to remind them, because they've already kind of internalized it by the process of articulating them.
yeah, so something that Andy's talked about on this channel a bit, and if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you can see all of our design videos. Just a plug for our YouTube channel real quick. But what Andy's talked about a lot, Melissa, to your point, is making sure to gain stakeholder alignment. And one of the things that he's talked about is the loudest voice in the room, like how to negate the loudest voice in the room. Do you guys have strategies for how you do that when you're facilitating these discovery or design workshops?
Yeah, absolutely. I think making sure that people have space to like independently come up with ideas. So that's why we love sticky notes so much, because usually when we are posing a question, we start with individual like idea generation time. And then when it comes time to share, we like round robin, we go around the room and we have everybody share what they came up, like quick fire. And that way we're able to hear like many more ideas than we would if we were just like having a regular conversation where people are discussing back and forth and you kind of go in circles. I think we structure our workshops in a way that maximizes the amount of input that we're getting from our participants. And I think this round robin style that really kind of makes the understanding of like, okay, we're not here to listen to one person talk for 20 minutes about their awesome idea. We're here to spend 5 minutes hearing 50 ideas. So I think, structuring the workshop in a way that invites input and sharing it on an equal platform is really important.
Okay. Well, okay. So let's gossip for a second, because that's why people come to YouTube, is to watch gossip. Nick, what kind of client interactions have you seen where somebody was in the room and they were kind of like the negative person, they weren't on board, they were sitting there like, no, this isn't going to work, this isn't for me, we've tried that before, and then it changed? And how did you guys get to that change? Because I know that a lot of what people are looking for, especially around design, is making it a more democratic process, opening up maybe an executive's eyes. Tell me about a client where that's happened to you.
Yeah, so I was doing some work with a product, and we had encountered an issue with something that was actually living and breathing. And we did have the loudest voice in the room really more or less advocating for user error on that issue and saying, well, you know, the users, there's going to be errors. It's just, you know, it's just a part of having a product that's live. You're just going to have people who don't get it. And so, you know, the whole point of that meeting was to try to solve the problem, right? Not just let it be, because this was actually affecting the end user and the business. It was hitting the business's bottom line. So really, in order to help alleviate that, you know, the first thing that we did was we presented the problem and we just showed what the actual issue was doing to the business and to the users that we care about. And then really, so after presenting that, it really opened up the door. And then we went through that process, you know, where we want to go through and get ideas and give everybody on the call a voice by being able to go through and, you know, anonymously put up stickies to kind of open up that door a little bit, to kind of broaden it more. And so as we went through and kind of walked through the process to identify the issues and that it's actually negatively affecting everybody that's, you know, involved, you could see kind of that democratic approach where the louder voices started to come through the quiet process, you know, where everybody's just able to kind of say, well, hey, look, this is important to us. These are the people that, you know, we serve. And so watching that kind of turn around, and then not only, because, you know, the problem seemed a little bit more ambiguous, I think, to that loudest voice. And once we were able to kind of focus in, get those ideas out and get it it definitely swayed them to be able to start focusing on a solution, not necessarily the ambiguity of the problem.
Yeah. So, Melissa,
Trust the process.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what's your advice? Trust the process. Okay, so I need 2 neons in the back. One that says opinions are expensive and trust the process, right? So I guess one last question for you guys is really, you know, where do you see the benefits of design? Is it in small engagements, or is it like sprinkling it throughout engagement? We always talk at BP3 about viewing something through a process lens. What makes BP3's design different, and your ability to kind of work with clients to coax out that whatever it is they need, whatever the goal or the alignment is that they need?
Yeah, I think, you know, having foresight is a huge differentiating factor that we have at BP3, because we are, you know, staffed with seasoned technologists and people who have been in industry for a long time. And, you know, being able to lean on that, I think, is huge. And, you know, we have a researcher who, like, his first published article, if you Google him, was in '96, and he's been doing design for that long. I think, you know, another differentiating factor is our focus. I think be able to like narrow down on the goals that are really impactful, and yeah, kind of removing the ambiguity through our process is huge. And lastly, our follow-up. I think, you know, being able to validate, you know, are we actually, you know, succeeding? Are we actually seeing what we want to happen? I think research is a huge part of the follow-up, and testing is a huge part of that. And, you know, what we're doing in these sessions are determining if people are happy with what we came up with. And I mean, I think that's what you want at the end of the day, like for people to be happy with your products.
Man, Melissa gets the gold star for contextualizing the 3 F's of BP3, the focus, foresight, follow-up. I mean, yeah. All right. Well, that was a great interview. I'm done. My job is over. Melissa, here's the keys to the marketing. Well, thank you guys for joining us. And just thank you guys for educating us about design. I know a lot of people think about design as visual design, but I think that you guys just gave us the like overall design is about alignment and discovery and really bringing people together behind a common goal. And I really appreciate you guys being here. thank you so much, Nick and Melissa, for sitting down and sharing such great information with us today. Viewers, stay tuned as we transition to the live Q&A portion, and be on the lookout for the link in the chat to enter for our noise canceling Beats earphone raffle. Due to the nature of the raffle, you must register with your work email to be included in the raffle. So Nick and Melissa, let's go have this live Q&A. So thanks, Nick and Melissa, throughout that entire chat. The chat over here was blowing up, so we've got a lot of live Q&A questions to ask. I will mention that at the beginning of that video, if you rewatch it, you can hear my 6-month-old screaming in the background. That's what working from home is when we're live on YouTube, especially. So, all right, let's start with the first question. When you're starting to work with the BP3 design team, do people usually choose one service, and what's chosen most?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what their timeline is and what their needs are. I think, if someone is like newer to design, we usually like to do like an initiation workshop so they can kind of get an idea of, what it's like to work with us. And I think, doing that kind of sells itself, because then they get to, participate in like the goal setting process, and they also see, how engaging it is for their team. So I think a lot of it depends on the timeline, and also, how familiar your organization is with design. We definitely like tailor it to your like what you're wanting to get out of these sessions, and how ready you are to embrace the process.
Okay, here's a harder question that I'm going to kind of skip down to, but do you sign up for the multiple services for one goal, or do you sign up for one service for one goal? And like, what do you guys see as the most productive for these clients that come in?
Yeah, I would say, what is the most productive? I think like doing some sort of goal setting exercise in one way or another is very fruitful. It doesn't always have to be a workshop. It could be, depending on, what we know already about the problem. We could do, surveys that we, send out that people can do asynchronously, or, we could do more like in-depth informational interviews. So I think, I'm going to say it depends, but we definitely tailor it to, what we know and what we're trying to find out.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it could, you could have 1 or 2 or 3 business goals that could equate to multiple, generally equate to multiple user goals. So it really does depend.
Nice. Okay, this is a spicy question and kind of like our gossip question, but is there a business unit, i.e. like finance and accounting, supply chain, HR, that you see is the most accepting of design services? That's a fun question. Thank you, Mark Hoffman.
I would say it's more about the people who are participating and like how willing they are to embrace, something new, or, a process that they might not have, personally, tested themselves. I think it's, just the kind of willingness to embrace change. And that's all dependent on the people in the room, in my experience.
What do you think, Nick? Is there a type of person?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Honestly, I think people speak and communicate and understand things in different ways. Some might be more financially focused. Some might be more, human focused. Some might be more usability focused. There's all sorts of different types of language. So I think that you might encounter where it seems like somebody's maybe less receptive, but I think it's just being able to kind of, when you're walking through some of the issues and the goals, it's really just being able to speak in the way that they can understand it and really show that solution in a way that they can understand it. So the receptiveness, I think it really does depend on the person and how they understand things.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think a big part is kind of translating, and based on the goals of the people in the room, we might make sure to phrase them in a certain way, like more metrics focused, or more usability focused for like individual contributors who are going to be more interested in that.
I like it. Okay, so I guess this one's a question for Melissa. Do you think you find out more through formal research or through guerrilla research?
Well, I'm very biased, and I'm going to say formal research. I mean, I think guerrilla research is, a great kind of a tool that's, very scrappy. And, if you don't have, a research practice, then like that's definitely better than, not doing it at all. But, formal research is going to hold up more than guerrilla research is, because you take into the factor of like, how many people should I talk to for this to be, and not just kind of swayed by like certain loud voices here and there, or, are there certain types of people that I need to talk to that I need to kind of like separate out because they're gonna, want different things. So guerrilla research is a great, scrappy tool, especially if you're kind of, if your organization is newer to research. But, I would say research pays for itself every single time, because that way you're not guessing, like, what the problem is. And they say it's easier to like erase something on a blueprint than like take a sledgehammer to it on the field. And that's what research is doing. We are an eraser, so you don't have to pay for a sledgehammer down the line.
Nice. Nick, is there something similar in like the goals and alignments kind of group where you can do like guerrilla goals and alignment setting versus like formal goals and alignment setting? Like,
I mean, honestly, I prefer when it's depending on how many people you have, stakeholders that you're working with. Honestly, I think formal setting sometimes, and it always depends on who you're working with. Some folks come to bat and they have smart, goals and objectives. But my like go-to approach really, number one, is just to get everybody who's going to be part of the conversation in, but really start at a high level to make sure you're taking everybody with you. Some folks might not be comfortable talking or speaking to organizational goals by themselves, or even just writing a goal, or, so I think the guerrilla approach kind of allows, and that's, as Melissa says, we love sticky notes. It allows for a lot of those things to come out. So maybe if they're not as comfortable setting a goal, they may want somebody else who might be higher up in the organization on the call to really start to pull those together. So I prefer that approach. I'd rather talk to, groups. I personally prefer to talk to groups and partners that have 100 goals rather than 0, because it gives you a place to start to like kind of hone in and talk about things and get everybody in alignment.
Nice. Okay, so this is another one on that kind of the same thread. Do you set a limit to the number of goals you create so you can set yourself up for an attainable situation? And then to go on from there, create more goals and then put them on, or do you put them all on the table at once and go for it?
Honestly, I like to put it all on the table. I think if we don't do that up front as much as we can, they start to kind of trickle in as you're kind of heading down the direction you think you want to go. So I prefer just, we'll put them all on the table. And then as we start talking about what we get to those objective level conversations and what we're really trying to do. I think some of the goals might kind of weed themselves out or end up in the parking lot anyway, because they might not fall within the scope that we land as part of those conversations. So.
Okay.
It's all about doing things right the first time. Yeah.
Put that eraser out, no sledgehammering. Okay. The next question, if I were to create a design engagement myself, are there elements in the design process that are often overlooked by people that people should pay more attention to? That's a great question.
I'm going to say research, because I think a lot of the time when we talk about design, like people think screens, and, especially like higher up stakeholders, there might be like, pressure coming from them to kind of see the fruit of the design process. But, the more, measuring you do, the, measure twice, cut once kind of philosophy. Like the more measuring you do, you only have to cut once. Whereas like if you do less of that, you're gonna have to cut, 20 times. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely like, a tendency to want to see the output of the design process, but I mean, it's all about gathering the input that's going to ensure the quality of your product, having the right input. So I will die on that hill. Thank you very much.
Nick, are you going to die on the goals and alignment setting hill?
I was going to say, I bet you can guess what I'm going to say. I think that's the other portion too. It's kind of the same thing as Melissa's talking about, and that can contribute to not having the right stakeholders in the room. So, which is also kind of, I think, symptomatic of that, of not understanding what the overall goal is and getting that alignment. So yeah, that's basically kind of that same thing.
Okay, I'm ready to see the death match between you two. Like goals, research. Yeah. All right. So, okay, Melissa, you mentioned you find surprising stories in research. Can you give us a scenario where this happened?
Yeah, I think, we kind of start with like this top level goal of, hey, let's, make this process more efficient. And then when you kind of like see how things are happening on the ground, like, one time we were working with like a pricing dashboard, and, they're looking between 4 different screens that have a lot of the like redundant information. So like one screen might have like 50% of what's on another screen, which might have, 30% of what's on another screen. And so it was really interesting to see how one person, instead of looking at all the screens, they're like, well, I'm just going to print out my dashboard and then write the prices on my printed piece of paper. And then that will help me look at less screens because I printed it out and wrote it on a page. So pretty amazing stuff that you would never have guessed are happening on the ground. You get to see it with your own eyes, and that's the fun part of design. Yeah, kind of seeing these like amazing workarounds that people come up with that, I think showcase the resiliency of people who are on the front lines, but it also kind of is a little, it kind of hurts seeing like how much pain is happening that like people just aren't aware of.
Yeah. I once worked with a sales guy who traveled so much that like, he'd be on an airplane, so he wouldn't get calendar updates. So every morning he'd have his calendar printed out so that he'd have all the phone numbers to be able to call into all the calls and everything. But so if anything changed in the morning or in the afternoon, he didn't know. He'd still be there. So, but it was the workaround, because at the time, I mean, this was back in the days of like, even pre-BlackBerry, and he'd be, calling in from his printed. He'd go to hotels and have them print off his calendar. I thought it was genius at the time, and then I had a couple of meetings get changed, and it didn't work out very well. So, won't name names, but you know who you are, and you're probably watching this. Okay, so okay, this is a good question. When you spend 5 minutes on 50 ideas, how do you narrow down those ideas to the top one? And do you get to the top one, or do you get to the top handful?
Yes. So I think being able to, frame it in the perspective of like which goals that you're wanting to accomplish is key, because there might be great ideas, but have not really much to do with what you want to accomplish. And I think, letting it happen democratically, like I said before, there are, voting rounds is one thing we do to kind of narrow ideas. And like you want these ideas to be chosen by the people who are going to be, affected by them most. So, the process of them, getting behind these ideas, I think is like a really great thing, because they're more invested, and they're going to be more like all in when it comes to, taking these ideas to.
Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Melissa nailed it. I think there's always, when you're kind of narrowing things down. It is about, is this really going to help us achieve what we're trying to do? And then, you can also have conversations about, constraints. I think that's always another portion. And so having everybody involved in that conversation as well, I think that helps kind of give us a little direction as well, maybe, and remove some of those ideas.
Well, so that's what I was kind of thinking on that question specifically, like, yeah, it's a great idea to build, a giant bridge across the city of Austin so that we totally skip all the traffic, right? But that's not a feasible solution. So how do you make sure that what people really want, so what they're voting for and how they're getting there, is actually a feasible solution? So within the constraints of like, we only have $100,000 to do this project, we only have $500,000 to do this project. How do you make sure that people are staying within that constraint? And we don't have, these huge systems or bots that can build this for us. Like, how do you make sure people stay within those constraints when they're deciding on these goals?
I mean, it's always important to not start at constraints, right? So you don't want to like chop off potential opportunities. So I think it's good to start there no matter what. But when we get into those constraints, I think that's, it could be tech stack, it could be timing, it could be budget, it could be all of those things. And so when we start to explore, further explore ideas, it's really a part of the conversation. It's like, all right, so in a perfect world where rainbows and unicorns exist, right, where we can do this perfect thing, now let's start talking about maybe some of those things, the constraints, what our reality is, and we can kind of at least try to get as close to that perfect idea as possible to still try to achieve those goals, but in a more realistic way. And so having conversations about those types of constraints, walking through, maybe even just some of the impact it might have on users as well. And we think this is a great idea, but when you look at maybe user journey, for example, and how they interact during the day, and then you compare it to the solution, some of those things, as you continue to do the research and apply those things to the conversation, I think that also helps to kind of keep the guardrails up.
Yeah, and I think, an activity that we like to do is having people, kind of weigh the ideas based on, what's going to be most impactful versus, how hard it's going to be to implement. And like that really helps kind of bubble up kind of the low hanging fruit, or things that are going to really, punch up when it comes to ROI. So I think, just having that conversation and, getting on the same page with like, hey, here's the low hanging fruit, how can we kind of think about how we can tackle these?
Yeah, I will say one thing, the advantage of working with BP3 there is we also have the technologist in the room. So the technologist understands the constraints and can help guide these design activities. So I'm going to do a quick plug. Make sure you register for the raffle. The link in the raffle is just below this video in the top chat. So go down the chat, scroll down, and click on the link to the raffle to make sure you register. This is your last chance. I'm about to pull a winner. All right, last question, Nick and Melissa, or hey, Nick and Melissa, this is from Stuart. When creating a design engagement, does each one have a similar starting template, or are they all unique? Can you walk us through the steps of creating a new design engagement?
I think that ultimately for design engagements, from kind of our perspective and our team, we're trying to get in and again, go back to understanding really what some of those problems are and have that platform to ask a lot of questions. So when we go to a design engagement, we as a team do have, we want to walk out with actionable items and to understand more of the problems that we can take back and really figure out some of those constraints and all of those things. But I think when we have design engagements, it's very much about just being able to accommodate our partners at where they're at. So they might look a little different depending on the situation. But I think that's the benefit of working with us, is to be able to, we have a lot of folks that can really kind of be part of that conversation. To it's not like a cookie cutter thing where you're going to come in and even if this doesn't fit you, you're going to be pushed into it, right? That's not how we work. It's really about understanding the problem and then kind of working our conversation together to be able to come up with viable solutions. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, guys. Well, this has been a really fun, driven interview. Thank you both, Nick and Melissa, and thank you viewers for joining us for episode 4 of the Driven series. Our random selection raffle winner is Christina Griffith. We will reach out to you shortly. You are the winner of the Beats earpods for this week. Congratulations. Our next episode will be Tuesday, November 9th, featuring Camunda's CEO and co-founder, Jacob Freud, at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. If you've not registered for Driven, make sure you do so. You don't want to miss out on our conference t-shirt. It is sent directly to your door. I know those are going out, I believe, this week. So you guys are going to start seeing people wearing them around, and you're going to be jealous. So make sure to register on the registration page, which you can find on the BP3 website. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thank you for joining us again. Thanks, Nick and Melissa.
Thank you. We would love to help you imagine a future that you can't see yet. So please reach out to us so we can.
Love it.